everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to multiply with the distributive property and also how to factor with the distributive property. So I believe this is something you learned in elementary school. And it's been a long time since 4th grade, so I'm sure you probably just don't remember, which is totally fine. So we're going to review it now. When we multiply with the distributive property, we have to take the number that's outside the parentheses and distribute it to the numbers that are both inside. So we've got here 3 times 6 and 3 times 7. When we work that out, we've got 3 times 6, which is 18, plus 3 times 7, which is 21. And when we add that together, we get 39. Now you can check your work by doing the other way of solving this, which is simply adding what's in parentheses first by the order of operations. So that would give us 13 when we add 6 and 7, and 13 times 3 is 39. Now for 4 times the sum of 16 and 2, that will be written as 4 times 16 plus 4 times 2. 4 times 16 is 64, and 4 times 2 is 8. When we add those two together, we get 72. And like I said before, let's check our work by doing 4 times 18, which is 16 plus 2. When we get those multiplied together, 4 times 18 is 72. And so our answer was correct. And last but not least, let's do 8 times 2 plus 8 times 9. And when we do 8 times 2, we're going to get 16, and 8 times 9 is 72. Okay, so we can add those together, we will get 88. And if we want to check our work, then we can do 8 times 11, which is the sum of 2 and 9, and 8 times 11 is indeed 88. Okay, so now I'm going to throw a wrench at you, and we're going to do some distributive property using variables. So remember, with the distributive property, we're simply multiplying the number outside by all the numbers that are inside. And here, we have a number that is missing, right? We don't know what that number is. So what we'll say then is this is then 2 times n plus 2 times 4. And 2 times n can't really be simplified any further because we don't know what n is. So we'll just write it as 2n plus the value of 2 times 4, which is 8. For our next example, 7 times 2a plus 7 times 5. 7 times 2a, remember 2a is 2 times a, so this is really 7 times 2 times a. And with multiplication, it doesn't matter what order we do it in, so we don't necessarily have to do 2 times a before we multiply by 7. We can instead do 2 times 7, which is 14, and we know that gets multiplied by a to give us 14a, plus 7 times 5, which is 35. And last but not least, 6 multiplied by 3x and by 5y gives us 6 times 3x plus 6 times 5y. 6 times 3 is 18, so that'll be 18x's plus 6 times 5, which is 30, so that's 30y's. Alright, so now we're going to try factoring with the distributive property. And this requires that we think back to all the way back in first quarter when we learned how to find GCF and LCM. In particular, when we find GCF, that means the greatest common factor. So we want to look for factors that these two numbers here have in common, okay, 32 and 48. So let's start by listing a few factors that we know both of these numbers are divisible by. Well, 32, I know automatically is divisible by 4, as is 48. So that's an option. I also know that 32 and 48 are divisible by 8. And as it turns out, they're both also divisible by 16. So, oh, and of course 2. Let's not forget 2. Now, I can factor using the distributive property with any of these numbers, any common factors. And usually the easiest way to do it is to choose the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor out of this list is going to be our 16 here. So let's say this then can be written as 16 times 2, because that gives us 32. And 48 can be written as 16 times 3. So now what I can do is I can say, well, let's pull the 16 out front, and then we're going to leave the 2 and the 3 together in the middle here. So 16 being our greatest common factor comes on the outside, and then we've got 2 plus 3 on the inside. All right, let's try another example. 54 plus 63. Looking at these two numbers, I recognize them automatically as multiples of 9. So let's say if we try 9, then this is going to be 6 times 9. And 63, I know, is a result of multiplying 7 times 9. Now, again, the 9 is what we notice they have in common. So I'm going to write my 9 out front, okay? And let's set up, you can set up your distributive property factoring like this, okay? So we know that 9 is going to go out front, and we know that what's left over goes inside, and so that will be 6 plus 7. All right, and last but not least, 28 and 42, we can recognize automatically as being multiples of 7. They're both multiples of 2. And they're both multiples of 14. So, that being said, I'm going to choose the largest one, which is 14. So, I can rewrite this now as being 14 times 2 plus 14 times 3. And now, if I set up my distributive property factoring, I'll write my 14 on the outside, and then I've got 2 plus 3 on the inside. Now, similarly, I could try a different route with the 7. I could use 7 times 4 plus 7 times 6. And if I write that, then I'm going to have 7 on the outside times 4 plus 6. And you'll notice if you add these two together right here, you'll get the same thing as what you would get if you worked out this problem. All right, and our last step for tonight is going to be to try to do factoring with the distributive property using variables. So in this case, our first example, 2a plus 8. Remember, this is the same thing as 2 times a plus 8, and we know 8 can be written as a multiple of 2, right? Because we know that 2 times 4 gives us 8. So now I can say, well, let's pull that 2 out front, and what I've got left is a plus 4. Let's try another example. 16b plus 64. So this is 16 times b plus 16 times 4. So again, my 16 is now on the outside, and what I have left over is b plus 4. All right, and this one gets slightly trickier. Now we've got 10c plus 35, okay? So that's 10 times C plus 35. Now, notice 35 is not divisible by 10, so I can't just pull a 10 on the outside. So instead, I'm going to have to come up with another number that I know is a factor of 10 and is also a factor of 35. Well, let's think about my factors of 10. I know that this can be written as 2 times 5. So this would then be 2 times 5 times C plus 7 times 5. Now I can pull my 5 out front, and what is left over goes back in the middle. So this becomes 2 times C plus that leftover 7. So my answer is 5 times the sum of 2C plus 7. Okay, so now that you've seen a few examples of your own, I'd like you to pause the video or turn it off and try the back side on your own. Remember, you can rewatch the video if you get stuck at any point.